Hi, Hannah. How are you?
Hello. Good. How are you?
Good, good. So recently I have noticed is that, that people seems like really, really has a lot of interest in non-duality, and rather than, let's say, specifically, any branch of a religion. And I think that in many ways, partially it's because that from non-duality is very, very easy to connect with science from that aspect of spirituality. Can you tell us a little bit about non-duality? What is non-duality?
I don't know if I can give you a definition off the top of my head, but let me just look one up to give, just in case nobody knows the general meaning of it.
Uh-huh.
So it refers to the nature of existence consisting of one interconnected whole rather than many separate things put together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the way that I think about non-duality in terms of spirituality is that everything is really the same thing. Like there's no difference between things. There's no difference between my soul and your soul, or who I am and who you are. There's no difference between who I am and the nature around us. Like everything's the same thing. And, I could take it one step further and say that everything's the same consciousness. So it's like everything to me is God, right? Everything is the oneness. Everything is the same exact bigger thing than we could ever imagine. That's
The,
how I kind of view it.
the infinite, the
Yes.
infinite inclusivity of
Yes.
everything.
And I could even call it a an energy that we're all a part of. I feel like you can call it anything because it really is everything and nothing at all. Like it is the if you imagine looking out on the universe, um and from what I've experienced in entering a meditative oneness state, it's similar to that feeling of just immense vastness. Like you look out into the universe and there's no end. And so if you just imagine that you're just floating in that as that is what non-duality really looks like to me as a visual representation. I don't know if that makes sense.
So it's more of a feeling of an energetic feeling. Like, for example, when we start to, meditate, and right away that you feel actually, the boundaries of your body and all of that. And actually, the whole body just really disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And I even one time had an experience that was just lying down and taking a nap. And then I put both of my hands on top of my dantian, and I could feel the obvious vibration of the dantian. And then when I felt that's happening, and I felt that, first is that I just saw it's happening. My arms turn into like waves, like moving waves. And then vertically, my body also, from top to toe, like it just turns into waves. And then I saw, like as if that I saw myself. So maybe that's kind of like an illusory, feeling. That what I saw myself was that I just kind of like, merged with everything else into these waves. That's literally that, that how I interpret it, or at least is that, in my head, and that's what I felt, that's what I saw.
Yeah.
Um, and so in many ways, I felt is like, probably almost anyone who has done, whether it's meditation or whether it's like, other forms of, stillness, and or is like lucid dreaming. Probably everyone had, these kind of experiences. And in these experiences, it's like as if everything just dissolved into one, and all you felt was just a vibrational whole.
Yeah.
And from that, you could feel that energy is emanating from that, like the sun is emanating out light.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a hard thing to talk about and pinpoint what it really is. I feel like the only reason that we're both able to talk about it and we explain it from an experiential, energetic perspective is because we've had that experience. And after I had that experience, then I learned what non-dualism was, but I don't have the experience of knowing what that is and not having the experience. So I'm not sure what, how it's conceptualized in the brain without the experience. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. For me, so even though, for example, is that I had that experience and I also had other experiences, like, for example, when I was walking on the trail of Eastover, and then suddenly, everything becomes alive and everything is talking to you, and it's like, it's talking to you in a vibrational way, it's not like really in language, but you felt that you understood everything,
Yeah,
right?
and actually, this is a good point because I feel like once I experienced a really big version of this, that's, when I became interested in understanding what that was. But growing up, I remember getting glimpses of this in my life. So whether it's through getting lost in playing music or, in nature, in imagination, right? Like, I feel like everyone probably has had some sort of glimpse of non-dualism in their life that they could draw upon.
Yes.
Yeah, so that is a really good point.
Yeah. That's how I feel. I felt like probably everyone did, but the thing is that, of course, is that probably, when we had the experience initially, for example, in my case, I had these experiences. I didn't make a, really any kind of conclusion out of that, right? I didn't kind of like, pick that up as like, oh, that's more of actually the real who I am. I didn't like associate with that.
And I didn't either. I think
right?
that's a really hard thing to do because it can be such a disorienting experience that I feel like the last thing your ego wants to do is figure out what that was. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly, right? So especially, in language, also there's such a sentence like, saying that altered, conscious, experience, like they
Yeah.
saying that, what do you experience? It's because that, at that time, your consciousness is kind of like went sideways, not the normal way. So in most people's heads, actually is that, people wouldn't take that as more of the real truth of who we are, rather than actually is that, like we usually identify, oh, this body, I am who I am, I'm a mother, I am a worker, I am whatever, so the I am is most of the time actually associated with a kind of a finite, definition of something,
Yeah.
So that's actually, really is that, which is very, very interesting in many ways, because in many ways, what we identify us with as of some identity, and or is that, the object that in front of us, because of our vision, we have a conceptualization of the object. So then we took that upon, that's what it is. And so in many ways, actually, is that our way of perceiving things actually is illusory, actually.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like we just do so much thinking, and we're so inclined to define the things around us that, we get lost in that. But, there's something really intriguing about non-dualism and like just speaking about oneness. I think that people are intrigued by things like that without realizing it. Like, I heard a friend talking the other day about how much he enjoys being in nature, and he doesn't know why, or like fishing, right? He doesn't know why, but there's something about just being there. Like when he was describing it, it's like there's something about just being there, immersed in it, and it's like you're part of it.
Yeah.
But like there's something in the brain that's very like, there's something peaceful about this because it brings us to be really present in our lives.
Yeah.
When we recognize that, oh, we can be within this energy, we don't have to have the thoughts, I am this, I am that, right? Like we can just
separation,
right, exactly.
the identity of, of this and that, right?
And people are intrigued by this, but they don't know what they're intrigued by. You know what I mean?
Yes. Like, because we are so used to this illusory vision and feeling of our reality.
Yes. And I think that modern society is really disinclined towards it. Like capitalism especially pushed us away from it because it's like, oh, wait, like when you retire, you can enjoy the fishing, enjoy the nature, right? Like there's this idea in our heads that like, oh, we can get that later. We can get that when we, after we deserve it, right? But that's just, then there's a whole talk about what really makes life valuable, I guess. Like what makes you feel like you've accomplished something when we're living in a society like this in order to have the life you actually are yearning for.
Yeah, like an identity, right?
Yes.
It becomes a separation,
Mm-hmm.
of who actually we really are, like just being of of us, rather than it's always about achieving of something and doing something, and it's about doing rather than being.
Yes.
Right? So I think it really is that, like all of these years, I felt that, that even though that, is kind of gradual, but it really comes to a point, and realizing is that we got it all upside down. It's really actually is that it's, we talk about, awakening, right? We talk about that, like how can we wake up, from like this illusory world that we are living in. And actually and then plus also is that everyone is working so hard, like want to be of who we are. And we make so much effort. It's like as if like we can get there, there's something that we can achieve and we can get there. But we actually totally not realizing is that it's so simple. It's like actually going backward. Like if we would just go backward, right? And let go of, all of the concepts and conceptualization, all of the identities that we pick it up, along the way, this and that, being an excellent, wife, being an excellent mother, and being an excellent friend, and being an high achieving, this and that, right?
Well, this is, and this is where we get into like yes, the duality of things, right?
Yeah, the
Like, okay, there's
duality.
the one way you're talking about, we let go and we just be, and then there's the other way where we go
Yeah.
and we do. But at the same time, it's like, this is what being human is, right?
Uh-huh.
So can non-dualism just be like having the being and doing at the same time? Like, can we look at being human as a non-dualistic
Uh-huh.
instance, right? And
Yeah.
I think that it's really hard because I believe that, you know, souls are here for very different purposes um,
Uh-huh.
in each lifetime, you know, when we separate it out in lifetimes.
Uh-huh.
But I also think that you you sometimes just have to go in one direction to realize another,
Mhm.
or, you know, go in one for your whole life, and that's fine.
Okay, so yeah, so separation. So actually is that I think it's very interesting to go into this because, like all of these years, of course, I started from small, right? I had like these revelations, and experienced these things. And at that time, I didn't really kind of identify or even how to say is that coming across the mind saying wait a second, isn't this actually more of who we are rather than like all of these identities and the things that we are doing, that's more of who we are, right? But the thing is that I did find is that I think that there's a unity of the oneness, which is the infinite self, the infinite I, that inclusive of all. And then at the same time, each one of us is kind of like an expression of an individual flower, that this one that or the Tao projected
Yes.
like
Yeah.
as a representation, an
Yes.
expression, or of the Tao, right?
And I love that because I feel like that's really the truest essence of beauty, like of the beauty of being human, you know,
Yes.
is when we really get to view it as like, okay, we have this oneness, and at the same time, we are we are limited beings here,
Uh-huh.
right? Like
Yes.
when we really view our reality, right? Then we are within this limited being,
Yeah.
and it's
And
okay to
yeah, and each one of us is unique,
yes,
right?
yeah.
It's like a God, like produced or God projected out. Even like every sand is different, and
Mhm.
so every one of us, as an expression of one individual flower and one individual, we're all different,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that like that's a really that brings up a good topic of how do you balance this? You have constant pressure from society telling you who you should be, and at the same time, you have the hard decision that you could make to just let go and be who you are, right?
Mhm. Well, actually, is that I don't really see actually conflict. So for example, is that I felt like, like initially, when I got into the project of Eastover, right? Definitely, I probably had a good, like I say, 8 years or 7 years. It was just, under this mood of like being pushed, like, okay, I have to do this, I have to do that. And I really worked like 16 hours a day, for a good 7 or 8 years, like on every single front, and trying to do as best as I could, you know.
At that time, do you feel like you were really identifying as like, I mean, it sounds like you were like trying to be perfect at doing this thing, right? Or
Yeah, I mean,
do
at
you feel
the
like you
same
were trying to
time,
follow a model? Do you feel like you were trying to copy what works?
No. I wasn't really follow a model. I actually set it out as an objective to like really, to me at that time, I felt, that I was doing something that I really wanted to do. But I actually did realize is that there was a motivation from coming from the ego,
Mhm.
there was this measurement or standard in my head, what is called a successful, like a founder of,
Right,
something of
yeah.
a
So
holistic center.
you had this identity formed of who you wanted to be, or who, like, what you wanted Eastover to be.
Yes, exactly, right. And also is that, at that time, I think that partially is that I felt that, when I stayed home for 14 years, I lost my identity.
Yeah.
So that's where the ego is, right?
Yeah.
So I lost my identity as who I am, kind of like in this society. And then I felt that, this is what I want to do. And also at that time, um, I had some suffering. So in my head, I projected out from I, not from this infinite, like a one. I projected out. So it's more of an ego and, projected out that there are so many people in the world that are suffering. And this is what I want to provide, so that it can alleviate suffering, and all of that. But the interesting thing is that along the way, I realized a lot of the things that so identified with the one, like for example, is that, at some point I realizing all suffering actually is projected from like the individual that is not whole, so that projection actually it has nothing to do with the infinite self. It has nothing to do with the one, because the one is like the sun, the one has no concept of good and bad,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
suffering and happy, the one don't have any
Yeah,
of
it's really, it's our brains, it's our perception, our brains that contains all of that.
Yes, exactly, right? So even though at that time I wasn't really, kind of like knowing too much about the non-duality, except only heard about it, but I did come to these kind of conclusions during of while I'm, doing my project, right? And then also is that, I also come to realizations of really is that, all of us are equal, there's no difference of, of the good and the bad and, and
Yeah,
all of that,
exactly. And I
and
think that there's a really good lesson also. I just want to step back into your experience running a business for so long. I think that there was a really good model to other people of, like, when you're first starting out a business, most people have something going on in their ego that's telling them what they need that thing to be, or
yeah,
what they need to be in order for that thing to work.
that's
Whereas really how you're going to build that business is most likely by having that thing really follow who you are as this individual flower in this universe. Like, it needs to work with you and how your life is and how your life runs and how, who you are inside,
yeah.
because otherwise it's just not going to, it's not going to be stress, like it's not going to be
Well, it's very
easy for you
stressful.
in a way. Yeah,
Well,
it's very
because you
stressful
are
to go in a
driven
direction.
by the ego and by the mind,
Yeah.
so you are
And that's not
constantly,
sustainable.
yeah, it's not sustainable. So it's constantly in entanglement, with the mind,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? So yeah, so actually is that, about, I would say 5 or 6 years ago, And I think I just kind of like, totally changed, like because by that time, I have already began to work more, internally myself, rather than it's always looking outside, always looking at of, the outside world, and then interpreting of that outside world, and trying to, satisfy a need that is external, yeah. And even that is illusory, it's projected, right? So what I realizing is that, but once I began to change is that, I found is that actually everything becomes easier, so you kind of like, go with the flow, and you are not having so much anxiety, like this has to be done, that has to be done, you kind of just go with the flow. And what's happening is that when you are more living in the being, and now energetically you are totally different, and you associate with people and the groups also very differently too,
Yeah, I
and
definitely agree with this. I think that there is a big difference in life when your life is full of pressure, like given by either yourself or external forces. You can't really enter that flow because you're full of this judgment, of this idea of what you need to be, right? Whereas when you're in flow, I mean, if you really could let go of the pressure, which is hard, and go into flow, and you'll see that everything that needs to get done does get done, right?
yeah.
Like, there's just something very different about that. So I agree with you completely.
Yes, yes, yes. And plus also is that when you are in flow, so somehow is that you attract like a very, very different kind of energy, of whether it's that someone you work with, or whether it's like, that people that you meet, your by like a very like a receiving, like a very kind of like accommodating at the same time, no judgment, right?
Well, I think when you release pressure, there's space in your life to receive
Yeah,
grace, like,
that's right.
yeah.
Yeah. So things like, it looks like as if, just magically happen, but it really, really has a lot to do. And that comes to another thing, which is that, so about this duality is that there's, I believe is that, when, so at the end for me was why non-duality became so interesting to me is that I came to realization actually is that, especially when you begin to feel things and doing things more on an energetic level, and we begin more and more seeing that actually everything happens kind of like, automatically, like the Tao is moving, right? So it's kind of like Tao is constantly moving and constantly moving, right? And we actually is that, even though we are not realizing, we feel like, actually, we start to do things, on some kind of, whether it's a drive or whether it's like intention that we intentionally want to, get something done. But actually, in a lot of the time is that energetically, these things actually, they happen automatically.
Yes. And I
That's
think, yes.
and that I find is that, so even though we are each individual, and we carry on our life as if, it's like as an individual, but when we in the back of our mind, in our subconscious, and we recognizing actually we are never separated from the one, we are always being with the one. And then in the back of our head, we know that, okay, everything that's happening, they are happenings. And it's if it's not, being with the Tao, it's not going to happen. Or the Tao is going to take care of it,
Well, I think it's like yeah, I agree, because it's like we're really just witnessing everything that's happening, and a lot of it, like, if you just, easier said than done, if you just don't think and you just let go and just let whatever happens happen, right? Chances are things will flow you in the direction you need to be flowed towards, right?
Yeah.
It just gets frustrating as a human being, because you could enter that state with an open mind and be in that state. And actually, there are some parts of my life right now that I'm in this state where, like, you're in this state of okay, I'm gonna let go and I'm gonna, just see what happens, right? And sometimes it's not what you expect. It's not, things aren't working the way you thought, right? Like you're a human. You mostly had an idea of what's right, of what should be happening, right? So it really is like, how much of this noise can we cut down in order to just like trust, which is why so many people in this world have trouble doing this, because it is really hard to cut back the noise and just trust, like, we're humans, we're inclined to define things, to pinpoint things, to have a mind about things.
Yes, exactly. And I like the word you use as noise, because, in most of the time, actually, we are not recognizing that, the voice actually came from the head. It's not really came from the heart, So, and then we take away by that, and it could include, fear, could include of any kind of, right? And so that actually is that, one of the things I think that, when just like when we are being with the one, the more and more that we are being who we are and being with the one, then actually is that, the head, like, a lot of this predefined, that this would be the good way, or is that, like in your head, you expecting it has to be some way, and then when that did not happen, and then, energetically, your energy kind of just drop it down.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the key. The key is actually is that it's more of an energetic thing of that, trusting.
Yeah, it's a big trust thing.
Trusting of, of like, and not let, the mind carry away, or is that, just becoming better and better when the fear comes up, or when the worry comes up, things are not going to turn out the way that you wanted. And sometimes we don't even, recognizing, or even asking ourselves, why does it have to happen the way that our head is thinking?
Yeah. And even, is that really the thing? Like, maybe if it's not happening, then maybe that's not what's meant for you, right? Like, maybe it's actually like you have no idea. You don't see 10 steps down the road where, you were sort of thwarted off your path and taken down a different one, and how that might turn out amazingly, right? Like, we have no idea.
Yeah, so actually, most of the time, actually, if you kind of like just more relaxed, about of the happening, and and that's not simply saying, oh, happening is just happening. Who really cares? It's not. It doesn't really mean that. It's really is that, our life and who we are is really, really infinite.
Yes, exactly.
Any kind of thought that it has to happen this way, then is that, you are falling into this kind of individual,
Well,
right?
there's just
So,
like I said before, when you have that pressure in your mind, right? There's
yeah.
not a lot of space to receive
Uh-huh.
other things, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So there's infinite, like possibilities,
And I think this is actually like manifestation in this way is really interesting
Mm-hmm.
because I think manifestation is a big word right now, in terms of like, oh, you can manifest like whatever you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like, okay, you can have your desires that are very ego based, and then you can have your desires that are, very heart based after you've spent some time going inside of yourself and, maybe the universe sort of revealed to you what really speaks to you, right? So in manifestation, I find it interesting, even if you sort of define out certain things, I feel like still the universe is so fun in giving you things that like are those things, but at the same time are like totally different than what you imagined, right? Like it's going to give you what you truly wanted. And that's why manifestation works to
Mm-hmm.
human beings,
Mm-hmm.
because when we get what our soul or our heart really wanted, even if it's a totally different, like one of the infinite possibilities that we couldn't have imagined, right? We're still like so resonating with that, right? Because
Yeah.
it is the Tao also presenting us like, oh, here it is, but maybe there's a little twist and that's fine, right?
Yeah.
Like it just gets really interesting to think about things in that way.
Yes, yes. So I think is that actually totally there's a possibility of that, of being who we really are, and that actually really is that we are the one, you know. But then at the same time is that we are also is an expression as an individual of the Tao, And then at the same time is that if we can have our mind be more of surrender and be more of like being happy, just being used as a tool to kind of exercise of
Yeah.
this individuality. So I feel is that it's possible this three aspect of the mind, of the individual, and the one be like in unity and kind of like and so how to say it, so it's not like we just abandon of this kind of like being an individual,
Yeah.
that we have this flash, and then we have these beautiful surroundings, and then we say, okay, this is just all illusory,
Well, I
right?
think that the third aspect you mentioned, right? You
Uh-huh.
mentioned we have the one, we have us as an individual, right? As a human. And
Yeah,
the third one, we have the mind.
yeah.
So I think the mind is the one that's really interesting because you like, if we really honed in on that, we would
Mhm.
say, like you said, right?
Mhm.
You can get trapped in things, but at the same time, if you are open, you
Mhm.
are feeling like you're in co-creation with the Tao.
Yes,
And
yes.
that's really where the magic is. That's the literal magic of being a human being in this world.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That is so beautiful because that's why I feel is that sometimes I feel is like we do have a beautiful mind.
We do. That's exactly it.
Yeah, and I felt like that there's so much creativity, and that creativity in many many ways it's because that we can use our mind to think,
Yes.
and like me, for example, I felt like from very very early time that I am so interested with the consciousness. It's like it's very strange, like I remember one of the year we went to Hawaii. I don't even remember, I think you were probably only like a 12-year-old, or not even 12. We went to Hawaii and you guys were like doing surfing, and
Oh
I don't
yeah, yeah.
know. Yeah, and I didn't know how to swim, so of course I didn't dare to be, near the water. But
Yeah.
I had this little booklet, and it's all talk about a consciousness. And I remember that, how that I was so absorbed from beginning to the end. I finished reading the book while you guys were doing the surfing. You know,
Yeah.
it's like I don't know. So I think that I think it's because that the mind is curious.
Yes.
It's curious about what is this thing, this thing, this consciousness. It's like as if it has something to do with me, so I'm curious about it. So the mind wants to kind of learn about it, you know
Well,
what I
I
mean?
think that this is exactly the mentality that things like mindfulness in this world is teaching us, which
Uh-huh.
is essentially how do you view everything neutrally so that you are open? It is literally a tool to keep us open.
Mm-hmm.
Open and curious so that we can allow things to constantly be explored when that ping comes up in our head, right? Like it really is just how can we stay open so we can keep creating with the universe, right? So we can just flow with it rather than drown ourselves in stuff that doesn't matter.
Yeah, like a co-create with the universe. I like that word. Yeah. And I think that how to say is that yes, I understand, some of the young people, sometimes whether it's like they use the mushroom or whether it's ayahuasca or whatever it is they are using, but actually is that they are not necessarily really ready. So then, when they see, sometimes they see whether it's the vastness or whether it's like the stillness, then like they are jumping from the extreme, like kind of saying, well, everything is illusory, and then
Yeah.
like
Well, it's
they felt like a totally lost,
Well, the thing is, so there's this interesting thing that happens, like when you do psychedelics or something that opens your mind, right? That's really what that is. It's just opening your mind up. It's cutting out all the junk, like we just talked
shut
about.
down the left brain.
Yes, and it's opening your mind so you are available to receive from the universe. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that so this is very high up in our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when somebody is very low and then they jump up very, very high, it can be very hard to ground down. Like something that needs to be realized in order to fully co-create with the universe is that you need to have grounding in earth because
Mm-hmm.
what you are creating is still a human experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? You are not creating illusions when you're open up there. You know what I mean? I think that's where things can sort of get confusing for people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that
But
is,
that's a very tempting space to stay in too for a lot of people. So,
yeah.
I don't think that it's like purposeful, but at the same time, like a lot of drugs and stuff will keep you up there because sometimes people don't want to face what's back down on earth because that
Yes.
that is a thing. You go to spirituality, let's say you go really up high, right?
Mhm.
And then what's waiting for you back down at the bottom, right? You still have to deal with that stuff.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
why
I know.
spiritual bypassing is a term, right? That's literally what that is.
Yes, 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 yes. Wow. That is so amazing. And I'm so happy that you have all of these, realizations and you had, all of these wonderful, pointers, and that is really great. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, I feel like you have a lot too.
Well, I'm just kind of like curious because in many ways, these last few years, that's basically actually what I was kind of like on this path kind of doing, like at the same time, like I enjoy meditation and being high, like achieving of like, the high energy and also sometimes, of the stillness and all of that. And then at the same time, because I have to take care of Eastover, so I have to always be in reality, you
Yeah,
know.
you have to ground back.
Yeah, and I have to ground back. So in that many ways is that it kind of forced me, to be grounded, and then have to, but then at the same time is that I find that more and more so is that when I am merging of them together, I find that actually I'm becoming so much more efficient and everything just have so much clarity, like I'm not like a float, definitely not a floating up here, but at the same time is that that I achieved really very high energy energetically, and that becomes a very good resources for me,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
and then also is that it helps me, like kind of cut through all of the crap,
Yeah.
and then just sees very clearly, what it is that really, and actually also is that at the end, really, it's so simple. And there's nothing for us to go and achieve, it's rather more of is how to let it go and cut through of the rubbish, and then come back to the most essential part that, who we are, and it's already there. Like this infinite self, is like we are already, that's how we are, we are
Yeah.
just kind of like being all of the noise and all of that, it covered us up. We are lost, we are
Yeah.
lost,
And I
and
think that the
actually,
way you put that though is really good. Like I think that that is kind of the ideal balance that feels amazing to people. Like really when they're in a period of their life that feels easy is really in that space between like spirituality and being grounded in reality. When you can merge those things like you're talking about,
mhm.
that really is the ideal space. I believe that that is where we are as human beings. Like we have the capability to be spiritual and we have the capability to be grounded in reality. And so let's meet in the middle. And that is, in essence, what being a human being can be, can be.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I think that, that is really achievable for everyone, you know.
I think so. I think it's a lot harder than I think it's really hard. Like
Uh,
I
well,
think
it's
that
hard.
let me explain why I think it's hard. It's just like you were talking about. So
Mm,
you said you spent, like you spent a while being really spiritual, right? Building this great energy and being up high, and then like you'd have to come back and you would, be grounded again and be dealing with reality and the stuff that comes along with that, right?
mhm,
So what I've found and I've heard from other people, just in regards to me now in my current situation, is like when I am alone,
mhm,
I can be the, great high spiritual person, love my life, love everything, right?
mhm.
But, now I'm in a relationship and there's a kid, right? Like, and so I'm like, oh my God, crashing to the earth, right? Every time the kid is like, I'm hungry. Okay. But so it's like this is a human being, like a human experience, right? Like, and then you start to think like, well, maybe I'm not meant to be in a relationship. Maybe I'm just supposed to be alone and be that high, right? No, like, how do I bring those things together, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what it's all about. And so I think it's like a learning process.
Mhm,
Every time you come to something that's so grounding, oh
mhm.
my God, I have to relearn these things in a new way because it's a new situation, right? And those are the lessons in being a human, you
Yeah.
know? And so I think that it can be so hard sometimes. Like sometimes I'm like so grounded in reality,
Uh-huh.
having human experiences, and then I come out and I'm like, what was that? Like 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 how was I, like chanting every morning and meditating and feeling on
Uh-huh.
top of the world for a good year, and then suddenly I'm like you know, where is all this projection coming from? Like, it can be so weird to be a human,
Yes, yes, yes.
right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I understand. Yeah, I understand. I totally understand. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
where it's hard, I feel like.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually is that how to say is that I feel like, the Tao is always right. And
Yeah.
yeah, and also is that, like the last few months, I really come to realization is that, like people, like a lot of people, like they say that, oh, they are very spiritual, right? And then they put themselves into this category, right? And then, they have this conception, that, oh, their life will be always spiritual,
Yeah,
right?
but you do think that way. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
you're immersed in it, you do think that way. You formed an identity around it,
I
which
know
is
that
the
in
thing.
itself
That's
becomes,
the thing.
and that's in the spiritual ego,
Yes.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
spiritual ego.
But that's what we're inclined to do. We're always trying to form an identity and stick
Yes,
with it when we're not realizing that the whole thing is always shifting.
yes, yes, exactly. Yeah. And then what I realize is that actually is, there's two categories of people. One category is the one that they consider themselves spiritual, right? And then, they put themselves in a category like that. And then there's the other people is that they feel like, spiritual practice or, like, or whether it's meditation or yoga has nothing to do with them, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the thing is that I feel is actually recently I really concluded, which is that whether you actually aware or not, and it doesn't matter what kind of identity that you have, wherever that you put yourself, life and work and relationship and whatever is happening, actually that's the one that is always actually pushing you and bring you without you even know or not, and actually is taking you along and then on a path to be awakened. And then
Yeah.
of course
And that's the Tao. Yeah.
that's the Tao, and that's
But I will say, like, yeah, yeah. I almost don't even want to say it's taking you on the path to be awakened. You know what I mean? Like, I almost want to say that it's like we've kind of projected as humans that that's what the human experience is supposed to result to, but we don't actually
yeah.
know what the purpose is.
Yeah, actually, like this whole human experience is illusory, really.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying is I don't
Yeah.
think we can label anything. I don't think we can give an identity to anything at this point.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
that's
So this
okay. That's the thing is
yeah,
can you trust, right? Like can you just go with it
yeah,
and let it
like
go,
this
right?
whole human experience is actually is that is illusory,
Yeah.
because actually in many ways it's an illusion of the mind.
Yeah, exactly.
The mind and the memory, right? So it's kind of like you kind of created this story, and then you call this is your life, and then you call this
Yeah.
is your human
And
experience.
even us talking right now is us calling things a million things. And
Yeah,
that's just what's
that's right.
happening because we're
And that
human.
itself is illusory, it's an
Yeah, exactly.
illusion,
Yeah.
right? So I'm just saying is that, actually is that, the Tao is automatically, whether you know it, aware it or not, the Tao is actually is that, is shaping you. It's kind of shaping you, without
Yeah.
you, whether you know it or not. Some people, like, for example, like you and me, we are probably actually pretty aware, right?
Oh
We
yeah.
are pretty aware about of the happenings, and this and that, and we're realizing, oh, okay, this is something is working on me, right? But
Yeah.
a lot of the people, they have no such awareness at all, and they thought, oh, they are just like doing their own thing.
But the thing is, like, it's all actually okay because even us, saying, "Oh, well, this is the Tao, and this is what's shaping us," and so, okay, we might be in a really bad situation, and we'll say, well, this is what we have to go through, right?
Yeah.
We're feeding ourselves illusions here, like everybody's just beating themselves an illusion. Like, it's okay. Like, this isn't truth, right? Like, that's the thing. And the thing is that, like, when you're in that, well, you might as well just let go. That's the whole thing. It's all an illusion, so you might as well just let go.
That's the key. That is actually the key, which is that how that you make this unity of the illusionary of the mind and yourself, the blossoming self, and this, truth that you actually know, of this one, that the Tao that you actually aware of, like how these three can be in unity. And it all comes down to is that whether you take it too seriously or not, whether you're willing to let it go, whether you're willing to kind of like just say, okay, it's just happening. It's only just an illusion and it's okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, this is a tool to get through life. How much do you cling to things, right? Like, okay, it's an illusion. Can you let it go? Like, that's literally it. It's a tool.
Yeah.
Right? It's another tool for your toolbox.
So at the end, it really comes down to non-duality.
Well, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So maybe that is why is that today, that the topic of non-duality, is just kind of so interesting to people, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's I mean, it's good. I feel like we have a new wave of sort of awakened people in this world who can view things in that way. And I think a lot of them don't realize that they do view things in that way. There are people who go through experiences in this life that cause them to view things in that way, and they don't even realize it.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is basically, some people like, it's like, as if like they don't practice. But the thing is that the things are just happening automatically, they are being shaped. And then many of the people, they don't even know of these concepts and the vocabulary and the language, actually is that they are very, very realized people. And they, they are very, wise people, and, and they don't call themselves spiritual, but actually in many ways, they are just like a realized, spiritual person,
Oh man, I was so frustrated the other day. Like, when I was talking to my partner, right? And okay, we had come into a conflict. And then he was like, yeah, just give me a little, give me a little time and I'll just get over it. And like, and I'm like, you won't even share emotions? Like, how do you not build resentment, right? And and he goes, I just don't. Like, I just get over it, right? Like, my ego just gets over it and then it's just gone. Like, I just forget it. It's gone. And I'm like, this is
but the question is that, okay, so is it actually really gone? Because, does it actually leave anything, like, let's say the body actually does, like have any memory of it or not?
From what I've seen of this person, this is just how he is. And he's like, I really see him as more realized than I am, because he is just so non-clinging. And I've heard from freaking healers, oh, he's older in age than you in terms of, like life age, lifetime's age. And I'm just like, what? Like, I can't. Like, sitting here like, okay, that's not fair.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. And I think that's really it is, it's like really we got to kind of like let it go and not taking everything so seriously.
I know, yeah. Like, I'm just so much more inclined to take things seriously, I can have a really strong ego, and then I can have like, no ego at all spiritual side of me, but at the same time, like, that's really all it is, like letting go.
All right, I think that we had such a good conversation, and it's getting late. Oh my God, it's past 12 o'clock. Okay, we'll continue on another time. Okay.
Yeah. Are you ending the recording?
Not yet.
Why
Love you.
are you leaving?